Hello, I'm Nancy Love, and welcome to the Academics. We're here to discuss the events of the week. To the right is Michael Wade of App State's History Department, Paul Gates of our Department of Communication, and Lee Dunstan of the Walker College of Business. Gentlemen, let's begin in Europe with two recent deals. First, in Vienna last Tuesday, the U.S. and our partners reached an agreement that limits Iran's nuclear ability in exchange for lifting international oil and financial sanctions. The deal was a long time coming, and it isn't done yet. Congress has 60 days to review it. Obama has already said he will veto any attempt to obstruct it. He insists that the deal is, quote, not built on trust, it's built on verification. But Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu calls it an, quote, historic mistake, unquote, that will create a terrorist superpower. Is it a good deal? And if so, how do we get it through Congress and past the Israeli lobby? Paul, you want to get us started?
Sure. I think it is a good deal. I think at the time, present time, this is all we can expect from the Iranians. They are pinched by the sanctions, but and they certainly want out of that, and that's how we've, I think, gotten what we got. Of course, now getting it through Congress is a different story. I think the Israel lobby and the Republican Congress is about the same thing, I then wonder, whose interests does Congress serve? I mean, are we putting Israel back as a protectorate of another power? Europe used to run the Middle East, and is it now our turn? I'm not sure I would agree it is.
My sense, Nancy, is that the logic of the president's position that he enunciated in his press conference this week is really hard to refute. What he's saying is, we have put safeguards in place. You can agree with them or disagree with them. The experts that we consulted and the experts that you're going to hear overwhelmingly say that we have verification in place to make sure that they don't cheat. And if they do cheat, we have a way to deal with that. The question, of course, is what is the logic of the position? He's saying, look, if you don't accept this deal, you may not like it, but if you don't, what is your alternative? And basically, he's being very stark. He's saying that the alternative is using force. When some of the critics say, well, the alternative is to walk away from the negotiating table and talk about further sanctions, he says the sanction regime that we put in place over many years is going to fall apart because Russia and China will not do it. So it's pretty clear. Now look, if you hate what has happened here, your chance to really stop it was 6, 8, 9, 10 months ago. Because what has happened is the president's position is locked down now so that his logic is essentially irrefutable. You may not like it, and a whole lot of people don't. And I suspect it is going to lose. There's going to be a vote in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, and it will be voted down by the majority Republicans, but it will not be capable of being overcome by a 2/3 veto vote. So that's kind of where this is headed, I think.
And what does that do to the standing of the U.S.?
Well, I think this treaty raises real questions about Congress. Congress is largely dysfunctional. It doesn't work a full work week. It spends way too much of its time raising money for its own re-election. This is going to go to the Senate, which is led by Mitch McConnell, the senator from Cole. And the man who said for public consumption that he was going to dedicate his leadership to stifling anything that President Obama tried to achieve. The treaty, I don't really feel any sense of expertise about the treaty. It looks like it's been pretty carefully drawn. There are not good alternatives. More talk is not going to achieve anything, especially by this Congress and its leadership. Treaties are meant to serve the national interest. And if it develops that they don't serve the national interest, then they can be dropped in effect. The United States is certainly no stranger to abandoning treaties if they don't, if they prove not to serve our interests. It's worth a try. And it's the best thing I think we've got. And I think you raised a good point. Are we running our own country, or is Benjamin Netanyahu, or is it the Israeli lobby? Yeah, with all due respect to Israel, the business of the United States is to, and its politicians, is to serve our interests.
Just one little technical point, Mike. This is not a treaty. This is an executive agreement. So what's going to happen here is that the president is going to make the deal if he abides by the legislation that was passed and is able to overcome the expected veto of the Congress. So the president's going to make the deal. The problem, of course, with that, in quotes, the problem, is that executive agreement could be reversed by a Republican president who may campaign, we don't know yet. Very interesting question, by the way, because some smart reporter is going to ask these Republican candidates, will you repudiate the executive agreement that Obama made on the Iran deal? And they need to answer, and I'm guessing they're going to say, yes, I will repudiate. Then the next question is, if they're elected, will they repudiate?
And that won't even require a smart reporter.
And even if it is a good deal, and I tend to agree with your arguments about that, there are other factors that those candidates can raise: terrorism, imprisoned dissidents, arms trade in the Middle East, intervention in Iraq and Syria. So this is far from done at this point. Now, on to the second deal. The Greek Parliament has voted to accept austerity measures in exchange for a bailout of its banking industry. We talked a bit about this last week. Does this save Greece's position in the EU? And if so, at what price? And including the price for Greek democracy. Any thoughts?
Well, the deal does override the will of the people, as expressed in the referendum of July 5th. I think, however, in realistic terms, this is maybe the way it should have gone. It was a nice expression of national unity and so forth to vote against the bailout, but I think things would have gone badly, or worse at least, if they had done so, if they had turned down the bailout. I think the government has looked at the reality of the situation a little bit more closely and has struck a bargain, I think, that gives them some room to rebuild. We've been reading lately about the strengths of the Greek economy, the Greek national treasure and so forth, as one of Europe's premier tourist destinations. And with a few tweaks as far in government spending and budgeting and so forth, and some real really thoughtful exploitation of Greek strengths, I think they can pull themselves out of this. And so I think this is probably the way it should have gone, yes.
My sense of this is that the political fallout from this is reaching a kind of a fever pitch. When I say the political fallout, I mean that the domestic German political fallout is, what is it? We cannot continue to support these profligate Greeks. And in Greece, the political fallout is, seems to me, from what I have read and what I think I have observed, it is a kind of a fury at Germans and Mr. Schäuble, who is the German finance minister, when they particularly frame their suffering in the context of what in the world are these Germans doing, dictating to us in this terrible depression we're in, when in fact they helped destroy the world 70 years ago. And if people think that these things don't matter, I think they don't quite understand the way in which cultures absorb what has happened to them and the way in which children and grandchildren inherit notions of right and wrong at the dinner table over a long time. So I think this is very serious stuff politically. And economically, if the plan B of Minister Schäuble goes into effect, which is a temporary Greek exit from the euro,
Right.
what that means to Greek people is that they will lose essentially everything, because the drachma that will come back in will be worth maybe 8 drachma to the euro, something like that. So they're going to lose almost all of their wealth and probably never come back in, and politically arguably fall into the orbit of an aggressive Putin Russia. Very serious stuff. Therefore, I see that the IMF, Madame Lagarde, listening very carefully, I think, to the United States, is saying, stop it, stop it. We need to get some debt relief in here as quickly as possible. Whether it's going to happen, I don't know. But the Europeans have shown over hundreds of years they are quick to be at each other's throats and can do it again.
You know, there are times when it's more important to give on debt. I'm recalling in the 20s the monies owed the United States from World War I by most of the Allied community, and it was preventing economic recovery. And President Coolidge's response when he was asked about it was typically cryptic. He said, "They hired the money, didn't they?" And we wound up with the collapse of the National Bank of Austria and the Great Depression.
What does this mean, though, beyond Europe, and even possibly for North Carolina?
I'm not sure that I could speculate as to what it might mean economically. That's certainly beyond any expertise I might have, but there are some disturbing parallels between the attitude toward Greek social concerns and budgeting and so forth and North Carolina. You know, we are under our own form of austerity imposed on us, and that is having a deleterious effect on North Carolinians toward the bottom end of the socioeconomic ladder, and that's what's hitting Greece. It's the same kind of imposed austerity on the Greeks that the Germans are trying to impose on the Greeks that's having that same effect. It certainly seems that it's so far worse in Greece. I would hate to imagine what that degree of harm would look like in North Carolina. But so I hope that we might learn a lesson from this, that these severe economic sanctions, I shouldn't use the word sanctions, but these severe economic policies don't work to the advantage of the people.
Well, in terms of North Carolina as well, we're facing our own democratic challenges. I mean, this week, the lawsuit filed by the Justice Department, the North Carolina NAACP, and the League of Women Voters against Governor McCrory for voter suppression began trial in Winston-Salem. And I'm wondering what this says about our state and what is at stake for North Carolina and the nation.
I'd like to say something about that. And I understand that this is not a legal question. That law was passed without any proof ever being offered that there was a problem with voter malfeasance that reached anything other than negligible proportions. I think it's time for that question to be raised. And I understand that the court is not necessarily, they're not going to decide on that basis. But that's the question that's been hanging fire this whole time. What exactly was the need for that? And if they can't prove that case, that there was a problem to be resolved, then what was the motive, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you cast the question another way, the idea that this is to prevent voter fraud, if there was voter fraud, and not just in North Carolina, but this would apply anywhere, of course, Mike, and that's what you're saying, but if there were voter fraud, it wouldn't be happening through people impersonating other people at the polls. If you want to perpetrate voter fraud, the way to do it is through absentee ballots. And so this is completely off the mark as far as the question it's addressing. This is not where the problem is, if there is one at all. And I doubt there is one at all, but this is a political stunt on the part of the governor and every other governor and the legislature that's gone along with this kind of nonsense.
I simply call it voter suppression. And I really hate to say this. I have lived for decades in the South. I love the South. But this notion of voter ID morphing into and in fact being voter suppression is really troubling. And my own personal experience is that as the evidence has piled in, or the lack of evidence has piled in, as Mike has pointed out, it's clear that it's voter suppression. And when I talk to some of my friends who were all up in arms when I called it voter suppression a couple of years ago, they don't respond anymore. Not because they don't think they can convince me, because they don't have an argument. It is voter suppression.
The people in power in North Carolina today are remarkably like the late 19th century redeemers who regained power at the end of Reconstruction, at the time calling themselves conservatives. They suppressed the vote. The black vote story is well known, but less well understood is that they also cut the size of the white working class vote enormously with things like the poll tax and literacy tests. And the object was to be able to control elections for their particular interests, which are basically planters, New South industrialists, and business people. It's the same game.
I think among the most cynical measures is the end of pre-registration for high school students. That is potentially depressing the voting history of an entire generation and an upcoming generation.
And you'll notice, Nancy, there's never any real reason given for any of this, except maybe some suggestion that maybe, well, we'll save money if we don't have to do that. Excuse me?
Right. Invest in voting.
But by all means, teach civics. Huh?
And it's that same save money argument that's really, I think, specious that you hear trotted out for justification of cutting back early voting days.
Ridiculous.
The savings there are negligible, and again, it's a political move. It's a stunt.
Well, I'm going to move to our next topic, and we need to be relatively brief on this one, but if we're concerned about energy consumption and the environment, which are issues that we've discussed in multiple contexts already, what is happening with chicken and pork processing and shipping for that purpose overseas? And talking here about the new FDA, USDA guidelines. And Mike, do you want to get us started on that?
Yeah, and there are so many angles into this. One is this. We are now 30 years into, 35 to be exact, into the takeover of government regulatory agencies by people who are, by and large, devoted to minimizing regulations and using these agencies to promote corporate interests. And this is a classic case in point. Smithfield, which was bought by a Chinese corporation last year, I believe, wants to send chickens which have been slaughtered overseas, 13,000 miles or so to China, where they will then be processed first into already prepared foods and sent back. But as one of the watch groups, Food and Water Watch, pointed out, this is very likely the first step to allowing China to export its own domestic chickens to the United States. Well, we'll see about that. But here's the larger issue. It's the disconnect between global capitalist marketing and the warning signs of global environmental trauma, which are all over the place, and how that bodes ill for genuine homeland security. Here's the thing, very quickly. The carbon emissions associated with sending chicken and pork 13,000 miles one way, 26,000 for the return trip, are enormous. You've got, first of all, you've got the lack of pollution controls in China to deal with, and the atmosphere is everybody's atmosphere. And then you've got the container ships spewing carbon into the atmosphere to take them over and bring them back. You've got diesel trucks transporting them. And we wind up dependent on a nation 13,000 miles away, who we have, both nations have issues with each other, and we're compromising our food security.
And don't forget, the health risks are not just from the particulate matter that's from the exhaust of all this transportation, but remember, we're sending these chickens to China,
Right.
where they are somewhat, shall we say, casual about food safety. And
Avian flu.
we are, exactly, it's all kinds of disease, foreign matter, chemicals that somehow get introduced into the food chain. And then, we bring this home to the United States, and of course, the reason for all that is it is cheaper. Somebody else is making money on it, and our health is put at risk to do so.
Well, about traveling long distances, and this is our last topic for today. but not least, the New Horizons spacecraft has sent us stunning pictures of Pluto. And will its status as a planet be restored? And does that matter?
Well, I'm a Pluto fan. I mean, I got to say that up front. But from what I understand too, and this doesn't seem astronomically proper to me, is that Pluto's orbit crosses Uranus's orbit. And I think that's planetary malfeasance. I mean, I don't think real planets do that.
Goodness.
It's the only one. But I don't think that should be so. So maybe it's better off in
I
in its
can't
dwarf
possibly
status.
top that. The crossing of planet orbits. That's it. I'm out.
I would just say this, and I mean it lightly. It really is fascinating what they've been able to learn about the solar system, and I don't discount that at all. But I think it's time we started learning a lot more about our own planet.
Okay. Well, I think we need to leave it there. That's our program for this week. We would love to hear from you, and you can contact us at watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Nancy Love.
I didn't mean to be so hard on Pluto.